Thank you for tuning into this video overview of how to write the body paragraphs of your argumentative essay. Now, if you tuned in last time to my discussion of how to write a claim, you'd know that I already have some claims started here, and I already have two prompts that I'm going to utilize for this writing of a body paragraph. Now, what's key in writing a body paragraph is you have to have really two components in each of the paragraphs. You have to have a piece of evidence that you explain, and you have to have reasoning that connects it back to the point you're trying to make. So you'll see I put evidence in normal font, and reasoning I've italicized. That's just for ease for you to see where I went from evidence to reasoning. Now in the evidence area, you're really trying to explain the details that you're going to reason backs up your argument. For example, I argue that the Electoral College promotes elitism in our system. So I describe how the Electoral College functions, and I pointed in the direction that it directly functions to support elitist ideas, or the elites. Now, this is also where I tie in a foundational document. Now, if you heard me in the discussion of claims, foundational documents should be tied in somewhere in your evidence. I would once again focus mainly on making an argument and then tie in your evidence, your foundational document, afterwards. For example, I already chose to talk about the Electoral College. Now, I chose to talk about the Electoral College knowing full well that the Electoral College is in the Constitution. So I say that this has basically been outlined in the Constitution by the framers, just as they envisioned a system built for the elites. Now, after you've explained your evidence, and my evidence is, explaining the Electoral College and how it functions in an indirect way and how it takes people kind of out of directly choosing their president, and then I really wanted to strive to point out how this relates to elitism. And I wrote a lot in my reasoning argument here because I wanted to make sure that I locked in those points. I secured the points. So in your reasoning argument, in the reasoning element of your body paragraphs, you need to explain how this relates to your argument. So I like to make it easy for myself by putting this supports elitism because the people are not blah, 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 blah. So don't be afraid to go back to your claim and say, basically say, my evidence supports the claim because. That's why I definitely recommend that my students utilize the idea of 4 becauses. That you can have because in your argumentative essay 4 times in the claim, in each of your reasoning points, and in your refutation, which is the last paragraph. Now, most of your reasoning is not going to be multiple sentences like this. A lot of times it can be summed up in one sentence. For example, you see I wrote here, this supports elitism because it allows the wealthiest Americans to have the greatest influence on who gets elected and shaping the imagery of those candidates. So here I am, very simply connecting my evidence being wealthy corporations getting involved with campaign finance. I'm making that connection back to that we have an elitist system more than anything today. So make sure that you bring out some evidence, you explain what that evidence is, and then you explain how this relates to your point. That elitism is the most prevalent today, or pluralism is the most prevalent today, whatever your argument is, make sure you're connecting it back to that clearly. And you can even separate things out, and you can even say, this supports my claim. The word choice doesn't necessarily matter as long as you're showing how it relates to your claim. Now, I did a second essay here about which branch of government is the strongest. And this one's a little shorter, but I still think it hits the points really well. In my first body paragraph, I talk about the role of the chief executive in controlling the bureaucracy. Now, once again, I chose this part without really worrying too much about the foundational documents, and I tied in the U.S. Constitution in both paragraphs because the role of chief executive, the executing of the laws, and the role of commander-in-chief, commanding of the troops, both those roles are in the Constitution, so I can tie them in relatively easily. So, first, my evidence, I describe what that role is. I describe that the president controls the bureaucracy, controls how they do things, controls the process. If I had more time, I'd probably add in something about executive orders or signing statements and how they're able to do that. But I did give an example of Barack Obama utilizing bureaucracy to basically enforce less marijuana laws on the states, on those states that legalize recreational marijuana. So don't be afraid to throw in an example. It's a great way to showcase that you know what you're talking about and locking in those evidence points. It also relates really well to your reasoning points. Now, you'll see my reasoning points. I say this makes the federal government this makes the federal executive branch See, sometimes I make a few errors when I'm running through this. Good thing to read your essay after you finish. But basically, your italicized portion here is the reasoning. So you want to connect it back to your claim. Why does this make the executive branch the most powerful branch? Well, I'm about to tell you in this sentence. So make sure you are using that because strategy. This supports that the executive branch is the strongest because you should be able to clearly see my 4 becauses in here, and those are locking in. They are securing the points for myself because I am giving a reason why my evidence supports my claim. Make sure your evidence can be explained to support your claim. You should be writing about this much to back up your claim. Just 1 or 2 sentences isn't going to cut it. Make sure you elaborate. Make sure you showcase that you know this topic, that you can explain it in detail, and make sure you showcase that you can connect it back to that claim in that reasoning point where you make a connection directly back to what you're arguing about.